let's take a look at some of the principles of color mixing. So there's basically 3 things to be asking yourself as you mix any color. What's the hue, what's the value, and what's the saturation? So value and tone mean the same thing. It's basically the lightness or darkness of a color. So on this grayscale value range, with 0 being white and 9 being black, where would you place the overall light side of the cylinder on our grayscale value range? And so by overall light side, I mean not the lightest light, but the kind of mass of the lights, the overall lights. Would you say it's around a 3 or a 4? I mean, I think 5 would definitely be too dark, but I would say it's somewhere in this 3 or 4 area. And then there's hue, which is like the color of the color, like orange or green or blue. And there's also saturation, which is like the intensity of the color. Like whether the color is pretty gray or if it's like a really intense, vibrant color, like orange is definitely really intense, and brown is kind of like a desaturated orange. So with the flesh-colored ball, in terms of the hue, what hue would you say is closest to the color of the overall light side? Would you say that it's like an orange? Yeah, so we know it's like a light to middle tone, and I think it's basically like an orange color, and it's definitely like a desaturated orange. And so there's 4 ways to desaturate a color. Just adding white actually desaturates a color. Titanium white also has a cooling effect when it's mixed with other colors, so that can help desaturate too. And then adding black desaturates, also brown, because brown is already kind of like a desaturated orange. And then also adding the complementary color, the color that's opposite the color on the color wheel, desaturates. So if we look at this color wheel, we can see that blue is opposite orange, and so adding a little bit of blue to an orange color will desaturate its color. And that's also the reasoning behind the flesh color and the blue mixture. Since the blue is mixed with white, it makes it a similar tone to the flesh color. Then we can add just a little bit of that into our base flesh color and basically desaturate it without affecting the tone. So right now, in this case, let's start by adding a little white. And you can see how already it looks more desaturated. And so in terms of the tone, what do you think? I think it's a little bit too dark in tone still, so let's add just a bit more white. And so we'll start by putting just a blob of that onto our canvas. It's easier to see the colors once you put a blob on. And so what do you think about the tone of that? I think the tone is pretty good. But what do you guys think about the saturation of this? Do you think it's the right saturation? Do we need to desaturate it more?
I'd say desaturate a touch.
Yeah, I think just like the smallest amount. So I'm just going to mix a little bit of gray in, basically. I've actually created this little value scale here, which I'll talk about more in a second. But it's basically white with a teeny touch of black. And I'm just mixing that in.
Is there any reason you choose gray instead of the blue?
Nope. And actually I'm going to show you after we do it this time, I'm going to do it again a different time with completely different colors, and it's going to look exactly the same. So yeah, good question, and no, we could definitely have used the blue and it would look exactly the same. And it's like you might just mix a little less blue compared to the very small amount of gray that I mixed, because the blue might have a stronger desaturating power than the gray did. So let's go now into the shadow side at the top here, the sort of warmer shadow side at the top that you see over here on the right. What do you guys think in terms of tone, like on this value scale? Yeah, like maybe like these two, you mean? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and the other thing is always flip your eye back and forth between the two things. It'll help you see the jump in tone better. So yeah, I think it's, you know, it's a good amount darker than the light. And in terms of the color, what kind of color do you see that top right-hand shadow side as being? And it's pretty neutral. When a color is pretty neutral, it can be hard to see like what color it is, and you could interpret it in multiple ways. Definitely less white. It's still, do you think it's still kind of a little bit in the orangey range? It's just like darker and more desaturated? Yeah, that's what I think too. And so something, you know, maybe we could try something like this. So the transparent red oxide burnt sienna might be a place to start. This is obviously way too saturated, right? So if we were looking at sort of getting it to be about this color, and it needs to be this tone, and it needs to be desaturated, I've mixed this sort of value range here. I'm just going to take from some of the gray that's kind of in that, you know, middle area and start by mixing it in. But it might also be easier for us to see when we put it on the canvas. So when I put it on the canvas, now I can see more clearly that it looks too dark actually to me compared to the light side. And so I think you're right. I think the orange is going to be good. I think orange is lighter in tone anyways, and it's kind of staying in the orangey range. So let's add some orange. Let's even add like a little bit of this lighter flesh color stuff just to lighten it a little bit more. And then it's like we make our best shot at it and then try it on the painting. That's a good basic color lay-in, and so let's go into the bottom and see how that affects things. So what do you guys think of this bottom plane? And the shadows reflect their environment, so since this is sitting on a gray pedestal, it's reflecting the pedestal. So what do you guys see in terms of the tone? What tone, like if the lights was here, the darker shadow is here, what do you think of that bottom plane on the sphere? The middle one, right? Yeah. So it's kind of like it goes light, medium, dark, right? And then what about the color of that bottom plane down here? Exactly. It's like, would you say it's like kind of gray, almost even possibly a bit purpley? Gray purple, something like that. So we can start with some of our base shadow color. We can mix some gray into it. This is like a grayish thing mixing into a warmish thing, and we'll just see where that takes us. And we know we need to make it a little lighter, so I'll mix some white in. Do you feel like it looks a bit pinky gray-y or purpley gray-y? Like it doesn't look as bluey gray as the table, right? So let's add, we could use either red. I'm just going to use some of this one. It's a little more pinky purpley. And then you can see it better when you put it into the paintings. Wiggle along that line. There's the tabletop. And then with the cast shadow is like darkest nearest to the object that's casting it, and it gets progressively lighter and softer as it moves away from the object. So that gives the sense of it sitting like on the tabletop, having it dark and sharper near the object that's casting it. One last thing, let's get the lighter lights in, and if you just mix white with like a teeny bit of gray into your base flesh color, that gives you a nice color for the lightest light. So the lightest light, our light source is a fluorescent bulb, and so it's cool, and that's pretty standard that the light source will be kind of cool. It's, well, white would be okay because white cools the color anyways, but it's not whitey yellow is what it's not.
So let's do a quick second version using entirely different colors to show you how you don't have to memorize a recipe for how to mix a certain color.
So the first time we used orange and white and gray, and now this time let's try using burnt sienna and white. So the burnt sienna transparent red oxide it's like a desaturated orange, right? And we made an orange and then desaturated it with gray before. And so now, yeah, that looks basically the same. So maybe it could be a little lighter actually. A little bit more white. So when I critique, I don't say add more of this specific color, I say make it warmer, make it cooler, because it's sort of making those adjustments based on what you see based on hue, saturation, and tone. Yeah. And so now let's mix this color on the upper right hand side, and last time we did it with the transparent red oxide and a bit of gray and a bit of orange. And so this time let's change it up and we'll use some red and some green. And so again, so red and green are opposite each other on the color wheel. And so we're going to create a warm, desaturated note.
And then we were lightening it with our base flesh color last time, so let's use a little of the new base flesh color to lighten it. Still needs a bit more lightness.
And also you can see how it's easier to be able to tell that it needs to be lighter as soon as you put a stroke on the canvas. So that's why you can, yeah, put a stroke down and then judge. So you don't need to be like, upset if you've put a stroke down and it doesn't look right, you know? It's not like you've messed up, it's just that you've put a stroke down and now you're gonna adjust it. And then moving to the bottom part, let's use blue and orange. So we'll use some of this blue mixture, we'll use some of we'll use some orange and some white to desaturate. So we're making that kind of grayish color, grayish purplish. We want it to get a little bit redder, so we'll mix. This time I'm using a bit of the Cad Red. Last time I used the Alizarin Permanent. And this time for the shadow on the bottom, let's use blue and brown mixed together. Last time I just used white and gray. And it gets lighter as it moves away from the object. And then we'll just use titanium white to get the highlight in. So I hope that helps you understand how you can analyze color using hue, value, and saturation.